Hello, trauma warriors. I'm Janae with Defeating Childhood Trauma, and we are back in this ongoing series exploring the different cluster B personality disorders. We have gone from that most famous villain, narcissistic personality disorder, to the least talked about histrionic personality disorder. Why? Because it shares five traits that at first glance look eerily similar to narcissist and three traits that look eerily similar to borderline. So now we are moving into borderline personality disorder, that other famous cluster B. And yet the awareness being raised on borderlines can't be any more opposite than the awareness being raised on narcissistic personality disorder. Narcissistic personality disorder is synonymous with narcissistic abuse, while borderline personality disorder is synonymous with all of the reasons you should feel sorry for them. It's okay to put narcissistic personality disorder on blast because, hey, according to the internet, they're the only villains of the cluster B continuum, while telling the victims and survivors of borderline abuse to shut up and stop stigmatizing the borderlines. As a child of a borderline who got her complex PTSD diagnosis because I was raised by one, and I've been in 5 support groups since 2014 for children of borderline, I can also confirm that my experience is no isolated incident. And with that being said, I will not be making any 2-minute apologia speeches to appease those of whom are not my targeted audience anyway. And if my constant reminder that there is hope for anyone who is willing to practice self awareness and personal accountability is not good enough for any cluster B disorders out there, well, all I have to say is stay in therapy and work on your self stigmatizing behaviors and stop playing Darvo on every platform on the internet. Darvo, by the way, is one of the 10 traits that all cluster Bs have. It's a 5-letter acronym for deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender. Remember, no personal accountability, no self awareness, there is no hope. Now, soapbox over, let's first move on to the common misdiagnoses that actually have been unfairly stigmatized. Therapists who, shall we say, graduated at the bottom of the class often confuse BPD for bipolar and vice versa. Bipolar is a mood disorder, not a personality disorder. Contrary to popular belief, bipolar disorder can have a manic stage that lasts weeks, even months. And they can also have a depressed stage that lasts weeks or months. With the borderline, on the other hand, they cycle through every single emotion in a single day, and sometimes in a single hour. Bipolar disorder does not determine good or bad character. Borderline personality disorder, on the other hand, has the 10 traits that all cluster B disorders have. And borderline got its original name from being on the border of neurosis and psychosis, explaining how another common misdiagnosis used to be schizophrenia. I also find it interesting how, as far back as the 1980s, both bipolar and schizophrenia were the most highly stigmatized long before anyone ever heard of borderline personality disorder. And yes, I'm aware that the psychology community has recently renamed them EUPD, emotionally unregulated personality disorder, but I have chosen to completely ignore that, considering how quackery today, psychology, is continually ignoring the veterans who are asking for the D in PTSD to be removed. It seems quite obvious where the cognitive bias is these days in the psychology community. Another common misconception to outsiders looking in: borderline personality disorder can appear to look like DID, which is dissociative identity disorder. We used to know it back in the day as multiple personalities. And this is because of the borderline's tendency to shift their emotions so rapidly. It's like flipping a switch. And finally, another misdiagnosis is complex PTSD. Though how on earth it could be mistaken for BPD is probably because the same psychology community promoting a sympathy campaign for the borderlines are also still refusing to have complex PTSD added to the DSM. So I will spare you all the differences there and just tell you to go to my site, look for my article, Complex PTSD versus BPD, The Truth Without the Gaslighting, which includes 11 visual aids that will help you out there. Now, finally, moving on to the 9 criteria for borderline personality disorder. The key word is, my feelings are the facts, meaning their emotion dysregulation is the great influencer on their perception and how they see everything around them. And once we understand that my feelings are the facts, the rest of the criteria will make sense. So, all cluster B personality disorders have an excessive need for something specific from other people, but that need will never be fulfilled. So, in the case of borderline personality disorder, they have an excessive need for co regulation, as in your feelings must match theirs, and also an excessive need for validation. Now, criteria 1 makes desperate attempts to avoid being abandoned. We can think of the behavior as a scale. Here again, you got, my feelings are the facts. I'm going to be abandoned. So there's this massive insecurity. And the behaviors go from a scale of extreme clinginess up to they leave you. And it comes from a place of, I'm going to abandon you before you abandon me. And in between the scale from the clinginess to abandoning you, there are other traits that can come out, such as jealousy, accusing their partner of cheating, also jealousy of their child as they start developing their own sense of individual self. That can be a problem, especially as the child starts growing into their independence. The borderline tends to get jealous, clingy, or both because they see their child as abandoning or neglecting them. And because borderlines need that constant, excessive validation, if you are not validating them and co regulating with their emotions, then it's a form of abandonment and neglect to them. And they will act out in ways that will either lead to child and parent estrangement or guilt the child into staying close. Criteria 2 has unstable and intense relationships, usually involves alternating between idealization and devaluation of another person. This one is 2 parts. One, it describes the love bombing stage with a borderline. It feels more sincere because for borderlines, they're going to put their so-called favorite person of the moment on a pedestal. Love bombing by a borderline feels like, oh my God, this person is really, really into me. But the moment that so called favorite person fails them or fails to follow the imaginary script in the borderline's head, my feelings are the facts once again. It's extreme devaluation. You're the worst, most horrible person ever, and you will likely be accused of things you never did because, here again, the key word is, my feelings are the facts. This leads to point 2 on idealization, devaluation, It describes their black and white thinking. You're either all good or all bad. They do this to their children as well, having that golden child and the scapegoat, and their feelings are the facts. So the scapegoat is the all bad, and the golden child is the all good. This is known as splitting, the black and white thinking. And this leads us into criteria 3, the splitting episode itself is easily provoked to anger or rage. So we hear a lot about narcissistic rage. And when the narcissist rages, they can go for hours just raging, 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 and then they will go quiet. But they're still present. They are quietly waiting while the rest of the family is walking on eggshells because you can feel it. The narcissist is waiting to explode again. It's as though the narcissist is thinking, give me one reason to blow up again. But for the borderline rage, known as the splitting episode, they can rage for hours just like the narcissist, but then they go quiet. When they go quiet, they're actually dissociating. Their dissociative quiet period is anywhere from 2 to 10 minutes. And then the very next thing out of their mouth is so calm and mundane. And I will demonstrate it for you since I was raised by a borderline. Just imagine how terrifying it is for a child being raised in this type of environment. And the borderline parent is rage, rage, rage for hours. And then brief quiet period followed by, so what do you want for lunch? Because borderlines have an excessive need for co-regulation and validation, that means the child learns young, very young. You had better go along with that new mood. You had better go along with that. And don't you dare let that borderline parent know that you're still hurting from that huge rage fest that they just displayed a moment ago. Because if you do, they're feeling invalidated and you're not co-regulating with their emotions. So if you don't go along with that, their new calm mood, they're going to fly right back into a rage because they can shift their emotions that quick. And because any microscopic ounce of accountability feels like a personal attack to them, again, my feelings are the facts. They're going to turn around and attack you for daring to make them look bad, which includes another splitting episode with even more Darvo. Number 4, under stress can become paranoid or experience dissociative symptoms. Dissociative symptoms were talked about briefly in the last criteria. So moving on to the paranoid part, it goes back to my feelings are the facts. Under stress, they will start making wild accusations. They'll start telling you what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're going to do, what you want to do, and it doesn't match the reality. Number 5, sense of self or self-image is chronically unstable. And there's a wide umbrella of outer manifestations you'll see, such as completely changing their appearance, also adopting a new interest all of a sudden, only to later on discard it because it didn't fit with their unstable image. Also being merger hungry, very, very merger hungry, which is another word for having a strong desire to enmesh with somebody and adopting their interest, their appearance, or wanting to be just like somebody else. Those are just a few under the umbrella of what you'll see as far as the signs of a chronically unstable self-image in borderline personality disorder. And it's part and parcel of what you see in the love bombing stage when they're adopting someone else's interest. They might actually believe in it because they're idealizing their partner. and they want to be just like the partner. They want to have all the same interest until it doesn't feel like the right fit for them anymore. And then that devaluation happens to the partner just as quickly. Because as it turns out, that partner was not the answer to their self image crisis after all. And same can go for the so called favorite person, which is actually primary supply person. Number 6, acts on impulse in ways that can be self damaging, like sex, drugs, overspending, reckless driving, that sort of thing. And if you recall from last week, when we talked about the comorbid histrionic, you might be having a sense of deja vu because the disingenuous or malignant histrionic is also highly impulsive and reckless. The difference is it all comes down to motive. For the malignant histrionic, they have an excessive need for excitement and stimulation. And so their high impulsivity is going for that. For the borderline, they are led by their emotions. And so their impulsivity are all emotional reactions. That and their DBT therapy refers to this as having an urge crisis, either act out by lashing out or self-soothe by self-harm. Both choices lead straight back to Darvo, of course. Either, look at what you made me do to myself, or it's all your fault I attacked you. One common manifestation, and I have seen the screenshots from all the support groups so many times, the text bombing or the voicemail bombing that happens because borderlines have an excessive need for validation and they have those abandonment issues. So if they feel neglected or abandoned, or you don't get back to them right away, they're going to text or voicemail bomb you. And it looks like they're having a conversation with themselves. It's like they're being Columbo. Remember that old detective show? What was his big catchphrase? And just one more thing. Except the borderline is coming back over and over again with another thing and another thing and another thing because of the emotion dysregulation issues and my feelings are the facts mentality. Now, as we move on into the next criteria, I need you to bear with me here because the internet doesn't want us to say a certain word. Okay? Ready? Number 7, makes frequent unaliving gestures or threats or mutilates him or herself. And yes, the self-harm is quite common, such as cutting and taking a picture and showing it to the internet because that's one of the things they want. They want you to feel sorry for them because it's an excessive need for validation, feeling validated because they hurt themselves over the pain. And I want to bring something to the internet's attention right now. Over a decade ago, the internet was weaponizing this criteria right here as a means of destigmatizing borderlines and silencing the voices of their victims. The psychology community was saying that we shouldn't call borderlines bad. We should be ashamed of ourselves if we say that because 10% of them unalive themselves. And I would just like to raise a little awareness right here, right now. There's another side of that coin that they're intentionally overlooking in their sympathy campaign due to this criteria. There's a difference between unaliving ideation and unaliving theater. The difference between ideation and theater is that in ideation, the person forgets all the people who would be hurt if they took their own life. In theater, They are 100% focused on those who will be hurt if they take their own life and are choosing to do so to hurt them. This is an excerpt from Trauma Glossary 1 on my site, where, unlike these platforms, I use the real word because I can't be censored on my own site. So here's the definition of unaliving theater on my site. Special disclaimer. Unaliving ideation is not only a common problem in complex PTSD, but there are those who have attempted unaliving or talked about an urge to end their life when they were sincerely crying for help, not as a motive to manipulate or worse, the ultimate act of vengeance, as you will see. Unaliving theater is composed of 3 platforms. 1. Coercive threat. If you do or don't insert whatever the cluster B wants, I will unalive myself. 2. Fake attempt. They actively attempt unaliving in some way, but with an obvious safety net which ensures they won't lose their life. 3. Final and ultimate vengeance. They complete unaliving not as a means of ending their suffering, but to inflict the ultimate abandonment on you. It's the final act of holding you responsible for their actions to the very end. Their declaration of unaliving is horrific abuse designed to keep you bound to them. The problem is, playing into this only further enables the cluster B into more coercive threats or fake attempts. If their tactics work the first time, they will keep doing this. I published an interview with a man named Don a while back on my site. You can find it under the real word for unaliving theater, false reporting, and abuse, a survivor's tell-all. In that story, he was bound to his abusive partner for 3 years, and she made many coercive threats. At the end, when he had had enough, she bumped it up to platform 2, fake attempt, which was going to all the tenants in the apartment building and telling them that this was her last day on earth. She intentionally left her own unit door unlocked so that she could be saved in time from her overdose. Don got out. He is a survivor. However, my father is still the victim. I was almost 2 when my father got fed up with my borderline mother and was ready to leave her. And what did she do? She swallowed a bottle of pills, went straight outside to mail her unalived letter, and conveniently passed out right at the mailbox. So, neighbors saw her, called the ambulance, stomach pumped, tox report came back. The pills hadn't even had a chance to enter her bloodstream yet. But hey, it worked. She got her man back. And now he is 51 years married to his abuser. And he is dead in every sense except physical. Let me assure you, he doesn't even respond anymore to her daily BPD rages. All he does is frown and grunt. He has completely shut down. So how dare the psychology community go around shaming the victims with this 10% statistic without raising awareness on what happens to those with a conscience not wanting someone else's unaliving on their conscience. Rant over. Let's move on. Number 8. Has highly unstable moods, depressed, irritable, anxious for brief periods. This goes with the emotion dysregulation we talked about in the opening and how they can cycle through every emotion in a single day, sometimes in 1 hour. You can't have your own emotions because it's all about co-regulating with the borderline. Whatever emotion they're cycling through in the moment, it's your job to co-regulate with them and validate them at the exact same time. Lord knows there were times my mother would rage and then all of a sudden start crying and demand us to feel sorry for her. Number 9, chronically experiences feelings of emptiness. When they are not emotionally dysregulated, they feel numb. And there's this sense of having a void within. This creates thoughts of having no sense of purpose or fulfillment. Now, of the 10 traits that all cluster Bs have in common, where the borderline is concerned, we need to start with focusing on the lack of object permanence. And like I said in the first episode, you think of their lack of object permanence as a scale from cheating to stalking. And when the partner is out of sight, it creates this sense of emptiness. So, whereas the narcissist, not all, but an alarming number of them, they will use the what's in Vegas stays in Vegas mentality, because when the partner is out of sight, the partner is also out of mind. And so the relationship doesn't exist, and that justifies the narcissist cheating. On the other hand, where borderlines are concerned, due to their feelings of abandonment and needing someone to co regulate their emotions and validate them, they're more towards the scale of stalking. Does that mean all borderlines are going to stalk? No. But there's definitely the clinginess that goes on with their person. They want extreme clinginess. They want to erode the boundaries, and it's because they need constant check ins with the partner. And they will get very, very insecure if they don't hear back from the partner right away. Remember, golden rule is if they want extreme intimacy in a relationship, it is synonymous with saying, I don't want boundaries. Also, remember that where a lack of object permanence is concerned in the cluster B continuum, the cheater can turn into a stalker on a dime, and the stalker can turn into a cheater also on a dime. This bleeds over into the jealousy aspect of the borderline, where they may feel insecure if you're involved in anything that takes the focus off of them, from being around your friends, coworkers, even hobbies, because of their excessive abandonment issues and believing you love someone or something more than them. And finally, masking and unmasking. As we have been moving through the cluster B continuum, we started with the narcissist, who is the most held together. And then we moved into histrionic, who can somewhat hold themselves together, but not quite like the narcissist. And today, the continuum has moved towards instability. And if you've never experienced anyone with borderline personality disorder and you are listening to the criteria for the first time, you might be thinking, there's no way they can mask. Actually, yes, they can. Oh, yes, they can. Believe me, among the most common questions asked in support groups for kids of borderline is, if it's a mental illness, then why can they act so fake in public? So, whereas a narcissist tends to present themselves as charming, confident, charismatic, the borderline tends to present themselves as charming, vulnerable, and also a little quirky. So, on first dates and also in situations where they infiltrate a trauma healing space, the borderline wants you to feel sorry for them. You've got to understand this. It's a source of that excessive need for validation. And so you've got to look for those traits. For the borderline, There's a tendency to overshare, share their life story. They will talk about what is happening, and then all of a sudden they will cycle back to an event that happened 10, 15, 20 or more years ago and just go on repeat just in this little cycle. And they're talking about it as if it just happened. Also, due to their emotion dysregulation, they will start crying while cycling back on repeat. There's the constant repeating of the events while the same emotion dysregulation keeps happening on repeat. That's because they are trauma dumping, not trauma processing. There is a difference between the two. Join me next week when we talk about what kind of borderline do you get when they're comorbid with another personality disorder. Forged in trauma, rising as warriors.